What happens when a royal accepts one of the most prestigious interview invitations in America, only to leave midway, visibly upset? Prince Harry's much-awaited 60 Minutes segment with Anderson Cooper started on a calm and respectful note. But as the questions became more pointed, the mood shifted dramatically. This wasn't merely an interview, it became a slow-boiling standoff between a veteran journalist and a royal determined to stay on his own terms, turning into one of the most memorable exits in TV history. The set was quiet and modest, classic 60 Minutes, no audience, no grand setup. Just 2 chairs, a table, and the seriousness of real journalism hanging in the air. Anderson Cooper welcomed Prince Harry with a friendly handshake and a measured smile. "Harry, thank you for coming," he said, his voice respectful and steady. Harry nodded briefly. He seemed at ease, but there was a visible tension under his calm. "Well, I suppose the world expects me to explain myself, so here I am." Anderson chuckled gently, easing into the conversation. "That's what makes talks like this valuable. People get to hear directly from you." Things began smoothly. Anderson asked about Harry's life in the U.S., his new ventures, stepping away from royal life, and raising a family outside of the monarchy. But even in those early moments, Harry's answers had a slight edge. He said life in America was tolerable, his tone carrying a hint of superiority. "At least here, I'm not forced to bow to outdated customs or pretend my family understands me," he said. "It's freeing to live somewhere I'm seen as an individual, not a backup part in a bigger machine." Anderson shifted in his chair, unfazed. He had questioned presidents and generals. Pride didn't shake him. He leaned in. "But isn't there some comfort in tradition? A sense of grounding, maybe?" Harry smirked. "Comfort? For who? Those lounging on golden thrones? Tradition is just a fancy prison," he went on, saying his family hides behind tradition to cover their faults. The mood shifted subtly. Anderson noticed a flash of challenge in Harry's eyes but kept his tone composed. "That's one perspective. Yet many still view the monarchy as a source of strength and unity. What would you say to them?" Harry didn't hesitate. "They're hooked on a fairy tale. They don't see the machine behind it, the silence, the control, the erasure. They love the crown, but they ignore the ones who suffer for it." Anderson paused for a moment, recognizing the rising tension. But his job was to uncover the truth, even if it became uncomfortable. He softly redirected. "Let's talk about family. You've shared heartfelt thoughts about Meghan and your children before. How has life changed as a husband and father away from that institution?" Harry's jaw stiffened, though he offered a faint smile. "Life as a husband and dad is as it should be mine. The press and the monarchy have no right to pick it apart. I protect what's mine, which is more than they ever did for me." Anderson nodded, but didn't let the moment go unchecked. "But when you go public, in interviews, your book, or your documentaries, doesn't that invite scrutiny? Isn't there a contradiction between asking for privacy and sharing personal details on your terms?" Harry's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's an old argument. Privacy isn't silence. It's control. I choose what's shared. That doesn't mean the world gets to take everything." The tone was clearly shifting. What began as a respectful dialogue was now bordering on a standoff. Still, Anderson stayed calm, even managing a slight smile. "That's certainly one way to see it. Others might call it being selective." Harry leaned back, arms crossed. "Selective? No. It's called freedom. And as an American, you should understand that better than most." The words landed like a challenge. The earlier warmth was gone, replaced by an icy tension that made the quiet set feel louder. Anderson gave a slow nod and took a note, keeping his face neutral. But inside he knew this was no typical interview. It was a powder keg, and Harry was holding the flame. The stillness in the room was misleading. Cameras kept rolling, crew members barely breathed, and between them sat 2 men, one grounded in journalistic experience, the other brimming with rebellion. The tension in the room became almost visible, like heat waves off pavement. Anderson Cooper leaned in a bit closer, keeping his voice calm but sharpening his questions just enough to crack through Harry's guarded tone. "You've spoken a lot about your conflict with the institution," he began. "But I want to ask something deeper. Your mother, Princess Diana, connected with people worldwide, not just because of her role, but her humanity. Do you feel like you carry that legacy?" Harry's lips tightened for a moment. The question hit a raw spot, and he answered quickly, his voice clipped. "Legacy is a word the media likes to throw around. You lifted my mother up, then tore her down, and now you expect me to wear her memory like some royal badge I should be thankful for? I'm not her replacement, and I won't let anyone use her to measure me." Anderson nodded slowly, unfazed. "That's fair. But many people believe you carry forward her spirit, standing against convention, pushing for something different. Isn't that something you value?" Harry scoffed and leaned back, arms folded across his chest. "People want to turn me into some symbol because it makes for a better story. But I'm not here to be anyone's emotional memory of her. My mother's legacy is personal. It belongs to my family, not the public, and certainly not to journalists trying to wrap it in headlines." His words were sharp, nearly accusatory. Still, Anderson absorbed the blow without flinching, a skill honed over decades. "All right," he said, gently shifting gears. "Let's talk about Meghan. You've both spoken openly about your challenges. But some critics claim your relationship distanced you from your family. How do you see that?" Harry's face tensed again, irritation flashing in his eyes. "Critics? You mean people who've never met her? People writing from behind desks like they know what love means? Meghan didn't pull me away from my family. She saved me from an institution that was smothering me. She gave me freedom. Anyone who can't see that is blind." Anderson kept his tone steady, even though Harry's agitation was now unmistakable. "But by saying she saved you, aren't you also suggesting that without her, you'd still be trapped? That gives her immense influence over your decisions, doesn't it?" Harry gave a smirk and shook his head. "No. It's called a partnership, something most of you journalists can't seem to understand because you're too busy analyzing other people's marriages instead of focusing on your own lives." It was a pointed jab. Still, Anderson remained composed, refusing to react. He simply made another note and continued. "You've also spoken about raising your children in the United States. How is being a father here different from how it might have been back in the UK?" Harry let out a short, annoyed breath. "It's simple," he said. "Here, my children get to be kids. They're not photo ops. They're not pieces in some royal strategy game. And unlike back there, they've got a father who actually protects them." Anderson tilted his head slightly. "So, you don't believe your family would have protected them?" Harry's reply came with a mocking edge. "Protected them? The monarchy can't even shield its heirs, let alone the so-called spares and their kids. My children would have been sacrificed in the name of tradition. That's not protection. That's using people." Anderson sighed softly, his patience holding firm. "Still, some would say that by publishing a book, starring in documentaries, and doing interviews like this, you're also putting them in the spotlight, just on your own terms. How do you justify that?" Harry leaned forward, his voice growing more forceful. "I don't need to justify anything. I do what's best for my family. Not the press, not the crown, and definitely not people like you." The air in the room grew colder. Anderson's jaw tensed, though his voice remained level. "It seems like any time you're asked about accountability, Harry, you turn the conversation back to control," Anderson said. "Do you think there's any middle ground here?" Harry's smirk deepened. "Balance is a myth. Either you write your story, or someone else does. I'm done letting others tell mine. I refuse to be a victim of their script. You wouldn't understand, your whole career is built on dissecting other people's lives. For the first time, a crease formed on Anderson's brow, a tiny signal that Harry's arrogance had pierced the calm. He let the silence sit for a beat, then spoke deliberately. Let's look to the future then. Where do you see yourself 10 years from now? What do you think life looks like for Prince Harry? Harry let out a soft chuckle, but there was no warmth in it, just disdain. The future? It's mine. I don't need to draft a timeline for the public. I'll do what I want when I want. People can either accept that, or choke on their expectations. Anderson tapped his pen slowly against the notebook, the calm mask still in place. But the quiet weight behind his gaze said something else. He leaned back slightly and took a breath. Interesting, he said quietly to himself. Anderson looked back at Harry, his expression steady. You know, Harry, he said, I've interviewed people at their lowest and highest moments. Presidents under investigation, soldiers returning from war, families devastated by loss. They all had one thing in common: humility. Do you ever worry that you've lost that along the way? Harry's face tightened, his smirk vanishing for a brief moment. Humility? He said with a sharp tone. Don't try to lecture me about that. I've survived things most people couldn't imagine. If I sound unapologetic, it's because I've earned that right. Humility is for people still begging for approval. I don't need anyone's. The words dropped like lead. The room fell into a heavier silence, the kind that made breathing feel thick. Anderson gave a slow nod. His tone remained even, but there was now steel behind it. That's certainly one perspective, he replied. Though the cameras kept rolling, everyone on set could sense it. This wasn't just tension. The interview was on the verge of falling apart. The energy in the studio was no longer neutral. It had turned dense. The crew, normally invisible and silent, now looked frozen in place. Every answer chipped away at the polite surface, exposing a deep fracture between the two men. Anderson adjusted his position slightly, the pen resting still in his hand. Though his voice was calm, there was a new edge of fatigue creeping in. Harry, he began carefully, you've spoken a lot about control, about building your own future. But critics often point out that even in your public appearances, the book, the Netflix series, interviews like this, your message still revolves around the monarchy. What would you say to people who feel like you're trying to escape the royal family, but never actually let it go? Harry gave a dry laugh, short and bitter. Critics again, he said. They cling to the fantasy. They want the crown to stay polished, no matter what's behind it. Let's be clear, I talk about it because it shaped me. It scarred me. You don't just walk away from the monarchy, it leaves a mark. If I choose to expose the truth, that's my right. If people can't deal with it, that's on them. Anderson raised an eyebrow slightly, his face still composed. But you've also gained financially from exposing those flaws. Isn't there a contradiction in that? Harry leaned in, his gaze narrowing. Profited? Let me ask you something. Is it profit when you reclaim parts of your life that were taken from you? Or is it survival? I took back my story. If people want to hear it and are willing to pay for it, that's their choice. He paused, his tone laced with irritation. Better they hear it from me than from the tabloids you love to quote. The jab was direct, but Anderson didn't flinch. His voice stayed steady, though the grip on his composure was getting tighter. I don't quote tabloids, he said. I ask the questions people want answered. There's a difference. Harry smirked again. Semantics, he said. At the end of the day, you're still digging for drama. Still feeding the audience what they expect. You're not any different from the rest. This time, Anderson didn't deflect the insult with a smile. His eyes narrowed just slightly. You've been very outspoken about your distrust of the press, he said. But here you are again, in front of cameras. Isn't it fair to say that you want the attention, but only on your terms? Harry's smile turned into a mocking half-grin. Ah, the classic setup. Attention, celebrity, the usual talk. Do you ever get tired of repeating the same storyline? I'm not here because I need your attention. I'm here because you begged for mine. Let's not pretend otherwise. The arrogance in his tone hit hard. A producer in the background shifted awkwardly. Even the soft hum of the equipment seemed louder. Anderson sat still, unbothered on the outside, but showing signs of strain. Fine, Anderson said quietly, refocusing. Let's switch topics. You've talked about how much your mother meant to you. She was known for fighting for her voice, often against the same institution you criticize. Do you think she'd be proud of how you've handled things? Harry's jaw tensed, and his eyes flared with a mix of anger and pain. Don't you dare, he said. Don't sit there and use my mother as part of your little broadcast. You didn't know her. You have no idea what she went through. And you don't get to guess how she'd feel about me. Anderson allowed the weight of the words to settle. His expression stayed firm, but his patience was wearing thin. I wasn't guessing, he said calmly. I was asking your perspective. That's different. Harry leaned back in his chair, his voice rising with irritation and pride. My perspective doesn't need your approval. It doesn't need anyone's. And if you think you're going to trap me into giving you some emotional soundbite, you're wasting your time. Anderson's pen tapped once against the pad, then stopped. He let out a slow breath, visibly trying to keep his tone level. All right. Let's talk about Megan. A lot of people admire her. Others criticize her. How has she influenced the man you are today? Harry gave a laugh, not out of joy, but out of disdain. Of course. It always comes back to Megan. Always the obsession. Let me make this clear. Megan's not my role model. She's my partner. If people can't deal with that, then they're stuck in the past. Just like you. He shot Anderson a sharp look. Why don't you ask about my work, my projects, instead of clinging to everything the world already talks about? Anderson's patience was nearly gone. His smile was tight now. I have asked about your work, he said. But every answer somehow circles back to grievances, with your family or the press. Do you think your critics might have a point? That your story sounds more like resentment than purpose? Harry's expression darkened, his voice lowering. Critics again. Always the critics. I don't owe anyone a purpose. I don't owe you a neat little arc. I live for myself, not for applause. Harry's arrogance had reached a boiling point. Anderson leaned forward slightly, his voice still calm but now sharpened with resolve. And yet here you are, he said, on one of the most watched shows in America, demanding to be heard. That, Harry, is a contradiction worth noticing. Harry's response came quick and cutting. Spare me the lecture, Anderson. You thrive off contradictions. Without people like me, you'd have nothing to air. So before you try to preach, remember what keeps your cameras rolling. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Members of the crew shifted in their seats. Even the quiet buzz of studio lights seemed louder. Anderson didn't react right away. He simply sat taller in his chair, then, with a quiet breath, responded in a low, deliberate tone. I've interviewed survivors, leaders, people who faced things most couldn't survive. And they all carried themselves with something I'm not seeing here today, dignity. What I see now, Harry, isn't strength. It's something else entirely. Harry's eyes narrowed. That smirk returned cold and dismissive. Dignity is overrated. He muttered. Survival, that's what matters. And I've survived more than you'll ever understand. The words hit the room like a final strike. The atmosphere was now electric with tension. It felt as though the entire interview could fall apart at any second. Anderson leaned back slightly, holding on to the last threads of professionalism. Everyone knew the next question, the next moment, could decide how this would end. The studio fell into a deep, charged quiet, a silence that felt alive. Anderson Cooper stayed composed, but his eyes locked in on Harry, observing every flicker of his expression. Across from him, Harry sat stiffly, arms crossed, chin lifted in defiance, like a man convinced he'd already won by never yielding an inch. But underneath the surface, a subtle unease began to creep into Harry's posture, like someone realizing the fire he lit was now burning too fast. Anderson cleared his throat, keeping his tone even. "Let's step back," he said. "We've spent nearly an hour talking about your choices, your family, your new life here in the States. You've spoken a lot about control, about taking charge of your story. But I have to ask, don't you think the way you've acted here, this defensiveness, this hostility, is shaping how people see you more than your family or the media ever did?" Harry smirked again, tilting his head. "Defensive? Hostile? I call it honesty. Something your industry seems allergic to. The real problem here isn't me. It's people like you, people who keep trying to shove me into some made-up story. Let me break it to you. I don't fit your box, and I never will." Anderson's pen tapped softly against his notepad. His posture shifted slightly forward. The patience in his voice was beginning to wear thin. "This isn't about some fantasy," he said. "This is about accountability. Every time I ask you about your family, you lash out. Ask about your wife? You scoff. Ask about your future? You brush it off. When does it stop being about what others did to you, and start being about the man you've chosen to be?" Harry leaned forward too, locking eyes with Anderson. "You sit there like you understand," he snapped. "Like you know what it's like to be hounded every second of your life. You don't. None of you do. And now you expect me to sit here and answer nicely? That part of me is gone. I'm not playing by anyone's script but mine." The room seemed to shrink around them. Every pair of eyes behind the cameras watched closely, no one moving. Anderson's patience, stretched tighter than ever, finally broke. He set his pen down, slowly and deliberately, then stared straight at Harry. "Let me tell you something," he said, his voice low, cutting through the heavy air. "I've sat across from people destroyed by war, people rebuilding after unimaginable loss, people carrying guilt, shame, grief, and you know what they had? Humility. Gratitude. A sense of purpose. What I see right now isn't bravery. It's arrogance. You call it honesty. I call it entitlement." For a moment, Harry froze. His smirk vanished. His face flushed with frustration, but he tried to brush it off with another scoff. "Entitlement? From you?" he shot back. "You don't get to define me. You don't get to sit there and preach about humility. I've lived a life you couldn't handle for a day." Anderson shook his head slowly, his voice still calm but growing firm. "No, Harry. You've had a life most people could only dream of. And instead of using it with grace, you've sat here treating every question like an insult, every opportunity like a trap. That's not strength. That's self-destruction." The words hung heavy in the room, not loud, but weighted like a verdict. For the first time in the entire interview, Harry's jaw clenched and his hands gripped the arms of his chair. He was angry now. "You think you can shame me?" he growled. "You think I owe you answers? I don't owe anyone explanations. Least of all you." Anderson didn't blink. "Then why are you here?" he asked flatly. "Why sit in this chair, under these lights, if not to speak your truth? You criticize the media, but you run toward the spotlight. You talk about freedom, but you're trapped by your own anger. You want to be heard, but you don't want to listen. And that's exactly why you're here alone. No crown. No family. No respect, just defiance." Harry's fists tensed, his voice rising. "You think you know me? You don't," he snapped. "You're just another mouthpiece in the crowd. Another vulture acting like you care. My family didn't deserve me. The monarchy didn't deserve me. And maybe the world doesn't either. But I'll still speak my truth, whether you like it or not." Anderson's face hardened, the warmth completely gone. The quiet professionalism he had maintained all this time was replaced with something colder now, not anger, but clarity. Anderson leaned back in his chair, expression like stone. "You want the truth?" he said, voice low but firm. "You're not living your truth, you're hiding behind it. You're not a rebel. You're a man who had it all and decided to set it on fire. Not with purpose, but with pride. And if your mother were here, I believe she'd be heartbroken to see what you've become." The words cracked through the air like thunder. Harry froze, the smugness on his face vanishing. What replaced it was pure rage. He shoved his chair back with a harsh scrape across the floor. "That's it," he spat. "I won't sit here and be insulted. This interview is over." Gasps rippled across the studio. A producer reached out instinctively, trying to defuse the situation, but Harry was already on his feet. He yanked at his microphone, the wire snapping loose as he stormed toward the exit without another word. The room watched in stunned silence as he disappeared off set. Anderson turned back toward the camera. His voice stayed steady, though his eyes carried the weight of the moment. "Sometimes the hardest truth to hear," he said, "is the one that cuts closest to the bone. Tonight you saw a man unwilling to face his reflection. That's his choice. But our role, always, is to ask and to listen. Even when the answers come wrapped in pride and pain." He exhaled slowly, the camera still trained on him, and softened his tone. "To our viewers, I want to offer a sincere apology. We hoped for openness and reflection tonight. What we witnessed instead was something else, but maybe, in its own way, even more revealing than a direct answer ever could be." The camera lingered for a moment on Anderson's calm but weary face before fading to black. And in homes across the country, people sat stunned. The prince, who had come to tell his story, had walked away instead, leaving not clarity, but controversy behind. Was this the most dramatic interview of Prince Harry's life, or just another moment in a long war between royalty and the press? Tell us what you think in the comments. If this moment caught you by surprise, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because this won't be the last time truth clashes with reputation.